welcome everyone to this webinar. The longer title is Strategies, Challenges, and the Value of Kubernetes Platform Teams. Many thanks for taking the poll. I actually can see a bigger spread. I'll probably dive into different aspects of how we actually have seen customers handle platform teams, what their approach has been. And I think the poll is still open, so we've got more and more people joining. I actually encourage you to also answer this question, because I think it'll be interesting to see how that spread looks like. But let's get started. So strategies, challenges, and value of Kubernetes platform teams. I actually will be speaking about different aspects, naturally focusing on what is the role and the timing of setting up Kubernetes platform teams. What are the typical challenges these platform teams run into, and that you actually will have a good knowledge of what we have seen in the market, but also and in different companies, and but also can use that as a basis to actually make your decisions. And and then at the end, I'll also disclose a little bit of what I think platform teams actually should focus on to deliver value to the development teams. And so I would say we'll actually just start off with the goals and the timing for platform teams. So if we think about Kubernetes platform teams and Kubernetes in general, there is naturally this technical perspective where, just enabling or having a technology that enables you to run your workloads across different cloud providers, or, and also easily deploy them, and so on and so forth. But I tend to actually take a bigger picture, because I think there are the majority of companies out there that have seen their competitors or new market entrants come and really challenge them. We actually have seen that as early as Apple with the App Store that actually launched a multi-billion-dollar business. We actually have seen that Tesla challenging the car and manufacturing industries, Uber and Airbnb challenging the travel and leisure industry, and naturally also Monzo and N26, the financial services industry. So these are companies that actually have started off there basically as a digital native company, and these are naturally challenging the existing market contenders in this space, and try to make sure that they actually can capture part of that market. So in response, companies have basically identified technology and software development as the core capability of really coming up with new products, digital products especially, and really driving change within the organization, making sure that they actually have and get rid of all these different silos that you typically see within companies, older companies that basically have, let's say the marketing, product development teams, then this software development teams, and then operations, and really put these together, restructure them into very agile product teams. And the idea naturally behind this is, to increase development speed, make sure that software development happens at the rate of the market, so you can then respond very, very quickly to customer demands. You actually can also learn with all the software development that you have then deployed to your market, and can identify if there is an opportunity for you to embark on a different route, and really make adjustments in real time. A quicker time to market, especially for new digital products, getting them out and then really adapting them to the customer needs. But also making use of the underlying infrastructure provided to cloud providers with machines that you can really rent for a certain period of time, and scale up and scale down, but also really including and embracing the technical innovation that is happening, and really being independent from the underlying infrastructure, making sure that you can actually then easily move from on-prem to the cloud, move from one provider to another, really picking the best solution possible at that time, but also revisiting these decisions and making improvements to these decisions, either from a cost perspective or from a technical perspective, because you actually have integrated new technology or new approaches that may require certain, let's say, machine learning capabilities or GPUs or all these things that basically then allows you to give your product teams the flexibility. And I actually tend to look at the platform teams from this larger perspective, because I think it's vital to actually have platform teams within your company to enable and support this growth, making sure that the development teams can actually really accelerate their journey and make sure that they can deliver the promises that or meet the expectations actually from the product teams and match the competition that is out there on the market. So in general, I think very, very important, really take a step back, look at the bigger picture, look at how you're as a platform team, and you can have these individually within the project teams or a central one that is abstracted out of the product teams, but really think about how you actually can best support your development teams, making sure that they can be very, very agile and deploy changes in minutes instead of months. Make sure that you actually can really meet your customer demands and facilitate that change throughout the organization. And I'll dive in a little bit deeper of what actually I really believe platform teams can provide the biggest value in these dimensions. The other aspect that you actually need to then think about if you actually see your platform team as the enabler for your development teams and your product teams is that you need to support the continuous integration deployment pipeline. Typically, that's very custom to an individual organization. With all technologies, there's no single best approach. It depends on what business you're in and how you actually work and how you can deploy innovation to your customers. But really build on this learning cycle, this build, measure, learn cycle, and really deploy within minutes, several times a day, whatever you're capable of. But really, supporting your development teams to focus on the digital product, and I think that's part of what this journey is all about, and the platform teams is really making sure that your development teams can break up either existing monoliths into microservices or start off developing these microservices, and then through the rapid innovation cycles, take care and take responsibility for operating all these different services that they provide to the market by basically running a true DevOps model where they can focus on really deploying frequently and managing the operations of that all by themselves. And to enable that, naturally, that's where we've got container, that's why we've got Kubernetes that allows you to orchestrate, a large number of containers very efficiently. And that's why I actually see the platform teams of Kubernetes being the biggest supporter of this change and the make and break point for many of these technologies. So if we look at what the aspects are that a platform team needs to take care of, naturally, we need to look at the whole life cycle of Kubernetes and the related technologies. So you actually need to think about what technologies to install. Do you actually take a product? Do you take the open source upstream version? Do you take the offering of a public cloud provider? So some kind of Kubernetes environment together with etcd, with your networking, DNS, with identity access management, with Ingress, and so on and so forth. So you actually make sure that all these technologies are installed, that they are properly configured, that they run with each other. Also think about how that actually looks for multi-cloud environments. So if you actually have different project teams on different technologies, be it one team on-prem, another team in one public cloud provider, maybe a third one in a third cloud environment, then naturally that's where a layer of abstraction needs to come in, where you actually can support something that really runs independently in all these multi-cloud environments. If it's not required now, think about if that would be something that you will need to think about in the future and support in the future. As I said, there are different use cases, and maybe teams might choose to run their workloads in different cloud provider environments, be it on-prem or in the public cloud, that may require from you to actually have something in place that allows you to manage everything and install everything very efficiently. The next thing, naturally, with installation is how provisioning is supposed to work. Do development teams need to provision the clusters all by themselves? Should they just spin it up? What does governance look like? What does cost allocation look like? How do they actually then connect the CI/CD integration? What is the best abstraction point for that? So let's say the CI/CD then really talks to the Kubernetes API, so you can then really have different layers that you can easily manage and replace, and allows you to really have a very independent and flexible stack. The next step is securing everything. You naturally would activate role-based access and pod security policies by default. You need to take care of network policies. You might want to harden your operating system and your container runtime. You want to make sure that no user has root access to containers, that you can make also sure that the cloud provider setup is secured, or even run tests, conformant tests or CIS benchmarks. So there are like many aspects that you might need to cover in the security setup. And you naturally typically would also have a security department within your organization that either may be or maybe not very aware of what is happening in the cloud native space and how the security concept changes in this environment. So instead of, let's say doing security checks before you deploy, you might really want to think about a model on how you actually can deploy very, very frequently, but then also make sure that security teams have access and understanding of what the governance looks like, and also make sure that it actually, that all teams follow that governance process to make sure that you actually don't have any security leaks, any crypto mining bots on your machines, and so on and so forth. The third aspect is the management aspect, where you need to think about how you can help your development teams understand and prepare for changes that may be coming, deprecation of any API commands that happen now and again in the Kubernetes environment. The last one, I think, major one was to 1.17. So that's where basically you need to make sure that the teams can fully understand what is ahead of them and do conformance checks. You may want to also think about the functionality that different teams request and how you can provide this. You plan migrations, so if you've got lots of teams on a single cluster, coordinate when these upgrades can happen. Think about how you can do automated upgrades in a certain period of time or time window, where you actually then basically have a low risk of outages, and also naturally the team there that can support it. Go on to allocating costs, seeing how you can actually then bill the different project teams properly, so you then basically become not a profit center, but let's say a center that allocates the cost, but is certainly not a cost center only. And research new apps. Think about how the stack is evolving and how you actually can spend time thinking about automation, about mitigating risks that may occur, and further evolve the platform so you can then handle more and more project teams natively and get them really ready from the very start. The next aspect would then be monitoring, naturally 24/7 monitoring. How do you want to staff it? How do you want to make sure that someone is capable of going in and fixing workloads? If you actually want to have, auto reconciliation, you can actually put that on and handle everything through automation, but that requires your workloads then to be able to handle this and handle it very well. You need to set up logging, monitoring, alerting, tracing, set up different thresholds that may trigger alerts and notifications. So project teams or you as a platform team can go in and take predictive maintenance, basically measures that, let's say if your disk fills up, then you basically can be aware of these thresholds that are reached, and that you can prevent workloads from going down. How you want to spread the knowledge. Maybe if something appears overnight, you actually might want to have a runbook that allows different team members in your platform team to handle and mitigate the risks very easily, or the issues. And also do root cause analysis to solve issues and set up new thresholds for similar problems that you have identified. And then once you actually have identified issues, naturally you need to go in and fix them. You can actually have auto reconciliation on, and it'll just restart the pods, which is can be fine. But the issue is you actually never want to be called out twice for the same problem, and that's where we have seen great emphasis on really isolating issues, doing root cause analysis, identify if there is a fix to the problem, either commit that upstream and fix it temporarily in their cluster, but then also make sure that the fix is deployed across all clusters. So you basically don't have another project team run into the same problem or same issue, and then naturally add automation or governance aspects to it, so you can basically mitigate risks and ensure that you can actually keep your promise, your uptime promise, close to 100% without impacting the flexibility that you actually want to provide your teams. And finally, naturally, the upgrades. So how do you handle upgrades? Do you want to do that automatically in certain time windows? Do you actually want to do it manually? Do you want to get support where you basically, especially for multi-cluster environments, where you actually have an automation that runs through and replaces all the pods and then actually goes from one cluster to another? Or do you want to trigger that the upgrade process, or have the teams trigger the upgrade process so they can monitor their workloads and see if everything goes well? How do you want to do proper testing? So if you actually do an upgrade, how do you make sure that whatever you actually test in the environment is the same version, identical version as that you will have after the upgrade in production, so you can make sure that your workloads stay there, that the environments are upgraded consistently, and naturally, you want to coordinate different teams, as I said, on the management, really making sure that the teams are all ready and can adjust to the new version. So that's basically a life cycle. And as I think you've seen and figured out all by yourself, there are like many aspects that there's no right or wrong. There's no technical solution per se. It's like, technology helps you implement a process and the structure to really manage this very efficiently, and to understand this. That's where actually I think the real value of the platform teams comes in, is really understand individually what the different project teams need in terms of flexibility, how you can best help them, what the pain points are and how to resolve them, and then really implement the technology in a way that it actually helps your individual project use cases. And and I think for those companies who have done that really well, the platform teams are highly appreciated. They actually, are an integral part of that project team, an extension to the project team, and it actually is something that allows them to support the transition to cloud native and also gather everyone onto the same platform very, very efficiently and successfully. If companies actually are not very good at that, that's where you typically will find project teams circumventing. Typically, we see that in infrastructure teams that basically have adopted or haven't adopted to the new thinking too much, where you actually will see that basically different teams take different approaches, prefer to manage everything themselves because they actually don't feel that the platform teams actually really contribute to their and help them as they actually would expect it. So yeah, think about how, what are all the aspects you actually would like to cover. Also the timeline. Naturally, you're never done with the journey, so the journey will always continue. But what role your platform team really wants to play in your company as being an enabler for this digital transformation. If we then look at how companies approach this, and I already saw that in some of your responses, you basically have some companies in this webinar have taken a more project-based approach. So let's say we've got 4 teams here, Team Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, and let's say the first one starts off, with a fully fledged Kubernetes version. They were the first one. They actually got an environment, maybe help from outside to actually set up that Kubernetes environment, also operate it and run it. But let's say Alpha actually was on-prem, and Team Beta basically decided, well, actually, I just need we've got a new innovation project. We actually will handle it all by ourselves. The overhead that Team Alpha has created will be built all the way through to us. I think we actually have a better way of solving the Kubernetes conundrum for us ourselves. That's where Team Beta starts off with, let's say, an individual cluster and starts development, and maybe that will grow or may not grow. And then we might have Team Delta that basically started off in this very similar way, but actually is very successful in managing. They might have chosen, like we've seen in Vodafone, for example, where we actually helped the team build up their infrastructure for their global payment gateway, and then they basically got more and more projects. So they basically abstracted the front end, innovative front end in the apps and websites and chatbots and so on, away from the monolithic backend. And that's where the team actually started off. They got in contact because they're in contact with them anyway, with many different project teams. And the project teams then start moving all their workloads onto that platform. And that actually then results, let's say, maybe in a third model where you actually have different teams and different knowledgeable persons in the different project teams that actually take care of the Kubernetes environment, either half or partly or with support from external and so on and so forth. So you actually will find then different individual spots of knowledge within these teams. But the real challenge is now, how do you move this into a platform team? So like a central platform team that then deploys a common platform naturally would make sense, because you actually will have, let's say, especially if you're using different technologies, different areas of competence, and they actually will always push their environment, which makes total sense because they've got probably made good experience. If not, they actually would have switched. And then it actually becomes really challenging, because then you start fixing problems individually. You've got as a company quite some overhead that basically also doesn't facilitate the digital change that all teams would benefit very easily from. And that's kind of something that you need to think of when you actually where the evolution basically allows you to be very flexible, but at some stage, if you actually find a common denominator that is big enough, that's where it actually makes sense to then think about a common platform team underneath that basically supports the individual teams, and then you can actually have different choices that you need to consider. One is either you leave the project teams or the individual stakeholders that are very knowledgeable in the cloud native space in the individual project teams. So let's say you've got two people in Alpha that actually know a whole lot about cloud native and the Kubernetes platform and all related technologies, one in Team Beta and one in Team Delta. Or you actually then really abstract them and ask them to join the platform team, which then on the other hand takes really highly qualified people, so good talent from the project teams into a platform team. So you actually don't really support the agility and transformation too well, because then the project teams become very, very dependent in terms of knowledge, and that also has a big impact on how well the applications develop on top of that. That basically the platform team then consumes the skills and the knowledge in the space, and you really need to think about how to get that knowledge back into the teams. And the third approach is naturally you let someone external run the platform. So you keep the good developers in the team, focus on the job at hand, but you still have very knowledgeable stakeholders that you can exchange knowledge with and resolve issues very, very quickly, especially since most problems nowadays are actually more related to configuration, to extending the platform, to new use cases and so on, rather than, let's say, the basic stack that is underneath. So that's where it actually, like these three models that you can actually choose from that, basically you need to make sure that at the right time you actually take the right approach to make sure that you can establish a platform team, or really keep on doing it individually in your projects, because there won't be too much growth in other areas. So we've seen customers where, basically they've got 80% of the environment is SAP, and they actually will, basically leave the environment in SAP for now. And then there's a smaller team that basically take care of innovative products. And then it naturally makes sense to retain that team and not create overhead that needs to be covered in terms of cost. If we actually look at what the different approaches are in terms of growing a platform team, typically, and this is now the approach from a different perspective, so not growing within the project teams, but typically if you actually then have a project or an organization that decides to go forward with the platform team, then typically it's driven by projects in many cases, but the approach or the company has already thought about setting up a central platform that should be used by all new projects. Then the different stages, like starting at the very bottom, you've got Kubernetes and related technologies that are set up, that security is handled, deployment is handled, operations is handled. So that's typically one step, and that happens together with stage 2, where you basically want to set up a continuous integration deployment pipeline and really think about automating lots of these aspects. I wouldn't go as far as saying a self-service platform, but it's typically something that we actually see a lot, is that the first 2 blocks are built out individually for a platform, and then naturally that it takes time to actually to deploy that, and if projects actually have time, then that works nicely. If they don't have time, then they scramble to get something together, and that's where the first approach is basically takes hand. Typically, platform teams would then think about letting the individual project team proceed with an environment that they may or may not be already using, and then build up a platform at the side, and then that's a later time start switching them over to the platform. That's basically what you need to consider. It's like there are the different steps, and typically the first and the second step are very closely related. Once you actually then talk about different teams, and when you talk about And that typically happens later on in the journey. So if you actually then have your first, second, third cluster, you can handle them in the individual project teams or even as a platform team without too much automation. But typically that's where the platform teams start building up tons of Terraform scripts or Ansible scripts or whatever to actually handle that kind of automation. But that typically addresses the problem of, let's say, single cluster setups. But if you actually really want to run multi-cluster setups where you actually have identical clusters, where you actually can handle and automate and monitor and all these different aspects of multi-cluster environments, that's where it gets complicated, and that's where another boatload of energy and experience actually needs to be built up to really understand how multi-cluster automation works. Kubernetes was designed for a single cluster. Now we actually have an approach where we actually kind of, a concept we started off 6 years ago, because we actually knew we will always handle multi-cluster environments because we would manage it for our customers. And this is something that is being built up now through the cluster API and other things where you actually use Kubernetes to run Kubernetes. And that's where you basically then start thinking about how to provision, how to secure it in terms of governance, how networking between the different clusters, the different nodes work, how upgrades work, how fixing works, so you can deploy fixes automatically across the control planes and so on and so forth. So these are elements that you need to then tackle in the next step. And there's still plenty of things left. One is use case specific apps and technologies. If you need a Kafka, or if you need, let's say, MongoDB, or if you actually need RabbitMQ, or a service mesh, like there are many different additional technologies that are not part of the standard setup, but that naturally come in very, very handy when you actually have certain goals you want to achieve. And then at the very top, and I actually left that open because you can invest quite some time in this environment, really working together closely with the development teams, help them understand how the platform works, how cloud native works, how you can make sure that they actually really appreciate the technology and actually also the possibilities, like using spot instances or master HA or node pools or GPUs and so on and so forth. So how they actually need to build up their applications in a way that can really easily make use of the technology, but also get their applications prepared for let's say things like spot instances where machines can just be pulled out, and then your workloads actually don't get disrupted through that process. That's where we actually see lots of potential, and that's where you can really accelerate the cloud native journey of your company and your development teams. So if you actually look at the whole stack, yes, you actually can invest lots of energy. The value that will help you accelerate your journey to cloud native and your company and deliver the biggest contribution to your company is at the very top. And I think that's where you actually need to think about how can you enable your development teams to really make use of the technology and help them get their applications ready and cloud native as much as possible. So if I actually talk about when is the best time to introduce a platform team, I typically really take a perspective from the development team and talk about time to value. So how much time do you have to generate value through cloud native? And that's very different depending on who you speak to. So managers or department heads or business people typically would say immediately. Their expectation is, well, just to get it installed and benefit from it. Technical people would take a more tactical view because they actually already know that there are many challenges they need to solve, and they actually tackle one challenge after the other. What we have seen throughout the market, and this is feedback that you can ask Zalando or 101 and whatever different companies that basically build up the cloud native stack themselves. At that time, that probably made sense. Then basically that actually can take quite some time. And the story is that you actually have the benefit of staying fully independent. So I fully get the point. And you actually will learn a great deal. You become experts in the field, and you actually also will have, let's say, a setup that allows you to support the best individual use cases of the project. The challenges, however, you actually will need a significant team to actually make use of that. So in large organizations, there are different approaches to actually build up that stack, or already use something pre-configured. But building this up individually is something that typically companies actually would no longer be doing. If I look at Zalando, Monzo, Shutterstock, they all went through that journey. They built it up themselves. They managed it themselves. Zalando, for example, I know they actually had a team of 40 people that built up the cloud native stack, and they're actually true experts in their field. Beautiful to see. But the challenge is it actually takes some time and it takes energy to actually do it. So you actually can get your project teams on board. And I think that's where I actually don't see the real time to value approach happen too quickly. So if you've got time, that's fine, great approach. You learn a lot, and you can always switch into another platform later. But if you actually really are under time pressure, it might not be the best approach, and that's what you just need to keep in mind. So if you actually have a platform team, think about how it actually would generate value for your development teams now. If you buy or use a product provided to you, and that also includes the product that, let's say, a platform team is building up, then as a team, a development team, I can readily use it. So I rapidly reduce the time to value. But I'm also limited to some extent. And that's what we've seen, especially with the large organizations where the infrastructure teams have built up something independent from a project, that they basically have built up something, and then basically acceptance within the organization was limited because individual use cases weren't supported, or they weren't able to implement it the way they wanted to. They weren't as flexible, and that's where we basically have also seen companies circumvent the platform team, which actually would be really a shame. And the third approach is basically where you basically either have a platform team, everything is in place, then that's perfect. Then new project teams can go on board very easily. We again using Vodafone as an example, we've already seen that they actually already had to build up everything naturally together with us, but and operated it for their own projects. And now new projects are just they just spin up a new cluster and can start developing very rapidly without having to take care of all the challenges that they already have solved. And I think that's where the value comes in. And it's achieved very, very quickly. What you can also think about, if you actually don't have that built up yet, that you actually use external partners to get this covered. So basically, someone who actually already has built it up and also operates it for you, and then slowly actually will build up the platform team individually within your company, so you can then transfer the knowledge, build up the experience, and so on, guided by external help. And that actually then allows you to support your project teams immediately, but at the same time establishing a common platform, so you actually don't run into the conundrum of having 3-4 different Kubernetes environments that you actually need to support, and that will be very difficult to then get everyone consume the same Kubernetes platform that you as a platform team actually would enjoy to provide. So Yeah, I think that's where I would see it depends on your time to value. So, like, how much time do you have for projects to go live, and how you actually want to be perceived within your organization in terms of enabling the different use cases. And that's, I think, it really depends on your approach and how much time you have to make this happen. So, what are the key challenges for platform teams? I think number one is definitely multi-cluster setups that I already have spoken a little bit about. So basically, Kubernetes is designed for single clusters. Typically, you then have a control plane with the different tenant clusters. You may then want depends on your application, but a staged approach where you've got dev, test, and prod environment. Maybe you have that for each an individual team, or at least you've got a dev cluster for each individual team, and then one test and a prod cluster. But then you actually come from one cluster to, let's say, if you've got a team of 7, you at least have 9 clusters, and then you may want to think about different deployment areas. So you might have on-premise, Azure, AWS. For Adidas, for example, we actually, we've got 40, 50 clusters where, basically they've got on-prem and AWS in Europe, in America, and in China. And then they've got different clusters for CI/CD, and they've got clusters for the different shop systems, and so on and so forth. So actually that can grow very, very rapidly. So you actually need to build up lots of automation around this and how to handle this efficiently. The problem is that the project teams don't benefit from that initially, because for them they actually need to get something going, but the automation is basically that's holding them back. Here, that's something where you can think about using technology that's already available and has already built to automate multi-cluster setups. But basically, if you want to build that up yourself, you would be reinventing the wheel. So actually, I would highly recommend for a platform team to go out and see what open source projects or licensed projects are out there that actually can help you solve that problem early on. So way before you actually then end up in an environment where you're spending most of your time just managing the different clusters and fixing them individually. Another aspect that we've always come across where we actually talk to a platform team that actually has been set up, but that actually doesn't have a project backing. That it actually typically fails if you actually don't have a project team that actually has a need, has a time frame, and has budget. Typically, platform teams are equipped with a certain budget to get started, but after some time, they actually need to then try to convince project teams to move onto their platform, which is very, very difficult if you actually haven't developed the requirements together with projects. So the biggest mistake from our point of view is, or from my point of view, would be to actually go forward with the platform, building a platform without a project in mind. You actually will learn a great deal with the project. So think about how you actually can build up things together with the project, and then bring on the next project and the next project and the next project. So you then basically have the financing, you've got the importance, the time pressure, and you also have the power to actually make changes happen, especially in large organizations that may require you to get approval from a security standpoint, and so on and so forth, where let's say the traditional security concepts might not always work together with cloud native development. Also, another aspect is unrealistic expectations. We've also had conversations with companies that basically said, everything needs to be self-service from the very beginning. They want their development teams to go in and pick, the Kubernetes, the persistent storage, the apps on top of it, the security area, and so on and so forth, individually. and they actually started off a project. At the end, I think they wanted to move 1,800 applications, but basically they actually started off with such a project without a project, project from the infrastructure standpoint, without a real project, and always with, like, the big picture in mind. Which then basically means that the development teams actually need to be able to commission everything and decommission everything themselves, which is something very difficult to solve, for a platform team. So if you actually have a platform team, then think about, how you can best support them in really getting active, getting the first project live, getting like the first version out, and then iterate from there. And at the end, you will always end up with some kind of self-service, but you actually will find many priorities on the way that actually will take overhand because it will support the individual project use cases. The fourth element, actually I added these slides because typically project teams are in a situation where they actually need to convince their project teams to come onto their platform. So they actually, project teams will always come with things that the platform doesn't solve. So they actually say, well, we can come onto the platform when you're ready. I've seen that over and over again in organizations. It sounds a bit like a carrot, but I can fully understand to some extent. I think what the platform team needs to keep in mind, they need to manage the platform as a product. And as a product company, you always need to consider what does the customer want to solve. So we actually also get FAQ, RFQs many times, where we actually basically already can see, well, they actually want everything, but it needs to be there immediately and should be at a very low cost. This is where typically also RFQs fail. So they, in that particular company, it actually they basically went back to the project teams handling the Kubernetes platform all by themselves because the requirements were so massive. So the way we actually take that approach is we talk to the individual team, try to understand, find a solution that they can work with, and then we can always think about how to better implement it. But really focusing on individual and asking questions like, why do you need this? What do you have in mind? So instead of saying, let's say we need 2 data centers because we actually, need to provide the utmost availability. Think about, well, what does it mean? And 2 data centers might be one option, but it might not be the only option. And that's what I can highly recommend, is really saying no sufficiently actually would be very, very, very helpful. So that's actually, meeting every customer request is definitely not something you should do. And the fifth aspect, which I think is probably the most important one, because that's where platform teams actually always get a very hard time, is the IKEA effect. The IKEA effect was something that was based on a research done by Harvard, Yale, and Duke University in the US. And they basically found out through different projects that the average value associated to something that you co-built yourself is over 60 times higher than if you actually just get something provided to you. So if a project team has built up their platform themselves and they actually already extended things, providing them with a platform that they can use will always be perceived less value. And in this case, actually up to nearly 70% less value than if they actually their own solution that they already have in their environment. So if you're thinking about platform team, think about how you actually can set it up as early as possible with the first project, and probably a partner who actually can help you really get up to speed rapidly, so you can really establish that platform. Once individual teams are on their platform, it will be very, very difficult for you to establish something that makes sense across the company. So it either can evolve, that can always happen, But if you actually already have different stakeholders in the organization, and we've got some customers that actually see this happen, there are always good reasons to use the individual projects that and solutions that the teams have. So this is something just to keep in mind. Just to wrap up, what platform teams should focus on. From my perspective, I think it's actually the value add that's on top of it. So not the technology only, it's not the operations, it's actually more how you as a platform team can help your organization transform, get security clearance. Like having all these security discussions, it doesn't make sense for a project team individually to have that discussion with the central security team and get individual approvals. Try to solve that problem holistically, because that actually will help you really gain a lot of speed and traction within your company, making sure that you actually can work together with the security departments and find a good solution. We actually had the same discussion with Adidas, where the security department wants something, but for the project and the platform team, it doesn't work. This is something that the project team can't handle as a discussion. This is something that needs to be handled centrally. We actually, basically help them as much as we can in this discussion, and that's something that basically takes a lot of time and energy from the project teams that actually then results in in opportunities not captured. CI/CD is definitely something, you can always evolve further, and you can set up the basic CI/CD, deploy into your cluster, done. But you can also think about how you can better help your project teams, let's say with testing, with progressive deployments, with percentage-based canary deployments, routing, scalability, and so on and so forth. So that's where this is another great area. Observability. Every project team needs to monitor its workloads. So and the applications on top of that. So that's where you basically can help with a standard stack that can then be either automatically configured or configured by them very easily. But the running and monitoring of that is something that you can naturally help. The boundaries aren't very clear. You can't always say, this is Kubernetes fault, this is your application fault. It's typically something together. So if they actually find an issue and identify an issue, that's where you can also help with tracing and logging and so on to really find the root cause and help solve the problem for once and for all. Simplify naturally, make it very, very easy for the development teams to understand the cloud native concepts, to develop cloud native, to make sure they can use the technology better and the infrastructure, the underlying infrastructure better than they could so far. And especially evolve, think about what the platform actually should look like in let's say in 2 years' time. If you actually want to optimize cost, what Spot Instance can do for you, what functionality you may need to include, shared services that you might want to establish, like say a central service for MongoDB or Elastic or whatever, that then basically I can either run within the cluster or outside the cluster. It depends on the use case. So to summarize, there are 3 core pillars that we see for platform teams. One is naturally the technology. You actually can get a managed cloud native stack with Kubernetes. That means upgrades are included and so on and so forth. And you then basically manage or compensate for all the aspects that are not managed, especially in the operations field, where you then basically have the 24/7 management for the tenant clusters, not only for the control plane as most public cloud providers provide, also really going in, doing root cause analysis, fixing, making sure that you actually identify whatever is causing the issues. But the majority of time is really thinking about how you can further evolve the cloud native stack, and also naturally your development teams, so they can reap the benefits. And that's why I put the arrow underneath. So how to increase the value that you can provide to DevOps teams, and the further you focus on the right, the more the cloud native teams, development teams, and product teams can benefit from a platform team, and the higher your perception and help within the company to actually make that transition happen. With that, I seem nearly on time, so we probably have a couple of questions